Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and today I'm going to pull a few more comments and quotes from a book by Stephen Clarkson and Christina McCall, Trudeau in Our Times. It describes Pierre Elliott Trudeau, former Prime Minister, that he had come to office as the least parochial of Canadian Prime Ministers, a politician more adept at foreign languages and more familiar with foreign cultures than any of his predecessors, including the country's premier diplomat and Nobel laureate Lester Pearson. This cosmopolitanism had accrued during a quarter century of traveling the globe, of hobnobbing with scholars and assorted gurus wherever he went, and dropping in on weighty conferences, etc. And it's described that when he was asked, this is moving towards the end, just before he's resigned and things like that, caused him to enter into. He says, what was on his mind? Okay, when they told inquirers was still peace, disarmament, and his place in history. Having spent 20 years in mainstream politics, mastering a hard-bitten trade, Trudeau had again put on the whole armor of God and returned to the messianic altruism that had motivated his activism in the 1950s. And we're quoting Marc Lalonde, who was a politician with him at the time. He said he was committed to Trudeau's government because Trudeau was committed to God and to keeping Quebec in Confederation. Quote, fundamentally, Trudeau and I are two strongly religious people with strong ethical norms. I can't help but wonder, this is a man of peace. This is a man familiar with cultures. What stood in the way of his being unable to deal with Indigenous nationals respectfully? How is it that he could disregard Indigenous nationals when he spent 25 years climatizing to other foreign cultures? I can't help but wonder, is it because of his strong Catholic upbringing? Because, of course, that brings us all the way back to before even Doctrine of Discovery, that, Indigenous nationals were heathens. They weren't Christians. And therefore, it was okay to push them aside. Was he still applying when he finagled the amendments to Section 35 of Constitution Act 1982? Did he have that in mind? Here's a lawful way to push them aside because, under Catholic dogma and doctrine, that's okay, right? That's his generation may well have been raised that way. Is that what got in the way and allowed him to deal with Indigenous nationals as less than humans, as having a culture and religious practices that should not be respected, but rather are to be done in? How is Section 35 doing anything different? It's not. It's simply saying, if we consistently, tell them we're pushing them aside, give them a little notice, maybe give them some money if there's some buildings that we're going to take. Nothing to do with underlying ownership of land, nothing to do with treaties. We can lawfully infringe if we have a meaningful economic component. There's nothing in the treaties that say you can, push us aside off our land if you can make some money. There's nothing there. So it's curious that a man of peace would create the conditions that we find today that are suggesting anything but. That Canadian governments continue to act threatening the peace by, instead of complying with treaties, instead of respecting the nation-to-nation relationship that exists between the Crown and Indigenous nations, instead of doing that, they are manipulating manufacturing consent in order to try to do the man, try to get rid of the nations, get rid of the treaties, so that whole sovereign, the only sovereign entity becomes the Crown, and therefore The Prime Minister has full control over everything. Let's put aside for the moment, that the unilateral actions of his father in bringing forward the Constitution Act 1982. I don't recall that Canadians had a vote on that. That's another issue in terms of constitutional reform and the nature of Canada's Constitution. But the fact remains that what allowed him to present such a peacemaker image, an international image, while at the same time repeating the mistakes of those before him and viewing Indigenous nationals as less than. I recall one elder who's no longer here. He was the most senior elder, if you will, hereditary chief, if you will, Interior Salishan. And he told me that he went to see Trudeau during these times to say, hey, remind him, in a good, respectful way, you can't do these things, right? We have our, this is where we're at. You need to do treaties with us. You've got treaties elsewhere. He had a good handle on constitutionality of Canada and the commitment that the Crown needed to make with his people, for instance, before things could go further. Pierre Trudeau's comment was, if you don't like what I'm doing, just go back to the bush, Indian. And that was it, and walked out. This, again, was a very highly respected elder, and he was shocked by that treatment. What was the foundation of that? I'm also Roman Catholic. I've been raised Roman Catholic. I went to private school, for grade school. But I'm a lawyer. Didn't he go to law school? You don't see me talking about how lawful it is under Section 35 to push these people aside, to take them out of their own lands and to deal with them in a manner that's disrespectful of their laws, their Indigenous laws and their nationhood and who they are. Instead of, treating them with disgust and something that we need to get rid of, I emphasize, despite my religious background, if you will, that we need to change course. We need to respect the constitutional realities for Canada. That's all I have to say.